With the 47th inauguration tomorrow and President-elect Trump preparing to take the Oval Office for a second time, we're talking about our own senators' major roles in confirming or not confirming Trump's cabinet picks, plus President Biden's farewell, what comes next on Capitol Hill, and how it's playing a role in Connecticut's current session. But first, a housing insecurity crisis in Connecticut that's left more than 3,400 people without a home this winter. We have leaders here to talk about what's working, what's not, and what they're asking for from the state. Good morning and thanks for joining us here on The Real Story. I'm Emma Wulfhorst. There are already thousands of proposals logged this legislative session, and committee work is more than underway. Top of mind is the state budget and those fiscal guardrails. Meanwhile, a record number of people are currently unhoused in our state during this cold winter. Joining me now to talk about the reality and what can be done, we have Sarah Fox, CEO of the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness, and State Representative Antonio Felipe, who represents Bridgeport. You're also on the Housing Committee, a lot of experience here. Thank you both so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having us.
So, Sarah, I want to start with you. Through the coalition, you're working all the time with service providers, street outreach, with shelters. This has been a cold winter. We've had some stretches. We had, a few weeks ago, the emergency protocol activated by the governor. What does the homelessness crisis actually look like for our state? Can you tell us some of what you're seeing in Connecticut right now?
Yes, first I just say, so we have seen year over year increases. Yeah. Every year we conduct our annual point in time.
Okay.
The annual point in time is one night in January every year that is an indicator longitudinally across the nation of how many people, families, our neighbors are experiencing homelessness. This last year we saw a 13% increase, with 44% of those being seniors and children. Every day we have a statewide by name list, and we have more than 5,000 people experiencing homelessness across the state, with 500 children and approximately 900 individuals who are unsheltered outside or in warming centers, or some in places that are unfit for human habitation.
And has that been, I know you mentioned obviously seeing an increase, but have we seen that population shift at all of who's experienced this? I know you mentioned obviously elderly people and children, some of the most vulnerable, but have we seen that either increase or decrease in recent years?
We certainly have. So we hear ongoing reports from senior centers across the state of seniors being forced into their cars because of rising rents. I hear stories about newborn babies being born in shelter, pregnant moms in tents before they go to the hospital, and then the babies living out their first life there. We're hearing devastating stories about the people, and then about people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, but also about the consequences of people, and babies, children, spending longer in shelter than we would ever hope.
Right.
The other challenges that we're facing is, it's hard to find housing for anyone. We are experiencing affordable housing crisis that's playing out here in the state and across the nation. And we're seeing people who are making $50,000 a year falling into homelessness as well. And so due to the lack of available rentals and units, homelessness is increasing, and it's increasing in a way that we haven't seen before. So the need is great today.
Yeah. And Representative Felipe, you're a voice at the Capitol for our state's largest city. What does the issue look like more specifically where you are? And as Sarah mentioned, even housing insecurity, people you represent who might be on the brink of experiencing homelessness.
I mean, us, like many other cities, we have long-term homeless that have been there for a while, but as the increases happen, so has the change in population. Sarah talked about the change in economic circumstances of some of these families, right? Parents working 2 full-time jobs, still not able to find somewhere to rent. That might be conflated by the fact that rent has also increased by 30% as homelessness has increased. So coming from a place like Bridgeport, it's a lot of families with children. It's a lot of our older folks who unfortunately can't find a place to live. And it's becoming a real problem for many people across the spectrum.
And I want to start with you with this. What's working? What would you say, whether, in our nonprofits on a state level, has been successful so far?
I think it's most of our nonprofits that have the continuum of care, right? It's those that have those cold weather shelters that are basically filling the gap between when people are running their services throughout the day, being able to get people connected with 211, people connected with services and providers throughout their region. But not everybody can do that. And sometimes you have people who work for these nonprofits that are dealing with the same issues at the same time. So trying to find help for somebody else while trying to help yourself and having to provide almost 24-hour care. Sometimes people get lost in the shuffle, and we're trying to prevent that by adding a little bit more cushion.
Yeah, and I want to talk more about the funding in a minute, but Sarah, for you, same thing. What are you seeing working when it comes to programs? Is there anything that stood out that's been really successful recently?
I mean, even across the nation, Connecticut is still a leader. We are coordinated. So when I hop on a call, I'm hopping on a call with communities across the state. We're coordinated. We have a statewide homelessness management information system that helps us know sort of like who's homeless and target services. We're connected. But the challenges that persist is like there's so many more people coming in than the resources that we have. And and I mean, it is about funding, but it's also about the fact that, we know how to do this. We have successfully, as a state, over the past decade, we saw decreases. We're seeing increases now, but we have a system that works. It needs critical and ongoing support and funding.
Yeah. And with such a growing population of unhoused people here in the state, we've really had to start thinking about new strategies as well. And Sarah, I want to bring up two specifically to do with shelter and hear your thoughts as someone, who's at the table with this. First, the state is shifting toward clearing encampments. We saw this before even the Supreme Court case, essentially allowing states to criminalize people sleeping outside. Connecticut has been clearing encampments and trying to get people into shelters and transitional housing. But then two, when there's not enough space in those shelters, the state and municipalities are looking at converting hard to fill spaces in buildings like malls, hotels, vacant offices. How are you seeing those two strategies play out?
Well, first, I would say housing solves homelessness. Criminalizing someone certainly does not. And we see much better outcomes from housing as a state than we do by doing any other type of service. And so, when we're working with municipalities, we're talking about prevention at every single turn, and ensuring a strong crisis response, and then moving people into housing as quickly as possible. And so that's where our focus is, and it's working together with all of our municipalities to figure out that process. For those that are outside, it's about connecting to critical resources, and if you have an individual who needs further assistance, connecting mobile health and crisis to that individual. And so it's how do we do things responsibly and provide care and services to our neighbors in need, because every person has a story, and people need services and help that is just and is right and is the same way that you'd want any family member to be treated.
And Representative Felipe, I know there have been some proposals to try and kind of fill that gap, as we were talking about, of people who might be on the brink or, almost one step just starting to experience homelessness. I know we saw specifically last session, I covered the, just cause eviction protection. What are some of those other, legislative solutions that we could see here?
Just cause eviction protection is definitely one of the bigger ones we're going to take up this session. Increasing the funding for our RAP vouchers for folks who are having a hard time getting long-term housing. It's basically our Section 8 here in Connecticut. And then also just making sure while we're funding these services, we're not neglecting every other piece of it, right? Our nonprofit builders are having problems with permitting and getting through the process quick enough to build maybe 4 projects when they're doing 2 in a year because of some red tape. So getting through those things and making sure that we're building as fast as we're housing is an important part.
And I want to talk about money now. Sarah, the coalition is asking not just for more than $30 million, but you're asking for a dedicated state budget line, guaranteed annual funding for homelessness services, which we currently do not have. So tell me a little bit about this ask this year and what you want that money to go toward.
Well, so we do have funding for homelessness services, but we also have many pieces of our coordinated access networks and our coordinated system that are not funded. So we have critical services that are not funded. And so our ask for the 33.5 is for 24 million of it is for new funding and line items. One thing in particular is that we are asking for is annualized cold weather funding.
Okay.
Winter comes every year, and yet we have no funding in next year's budget for critical warming center services that bring people into the cold and prevent people from freezing.
Right.
And so we're asking for $5 million annualized year after year, dependable funding that will help us plan forward together to make sure that we're able to have the impact that we need every winter. Beyond that, we're asking for flexible funding. These are critical dollars to prevent families and people from coming into homelessness. We have had them through ARPA funding, and we've been very grateful for those dollars, but we need them year after year. We need things to be annualized. And another huge part of our ask is asking for the services that are funded through the Department of Housing budget to be adjusted to account for inflation. Every single business needs dollars to ensure that they're able to remain open. The cost of electricity, the cost of insurance, the cost of technology has increased dramatically, as has the impact of minimum wage. And we need to make sure that our shelters and our services and our homeless response system have the amount of dollars necessary to do this critical work. Because it is a life-saving service, and our staff need to be able to be paid so that they're not falling into homelessness, so that they have the resources they need to be able to do this work.
And you mentioned having that line item during cold weather. As you said, winter comes every year, and we kind of started with talking about that as well, because it obviously is winter right now. What do you want people to know if they are in that situation? Where can they go? What information do you want them to have?
Well, directly they should go to 211ct.org. And if they are experiencing, Monday will be a cold snap.
Yep.
And we as a state are mobilizing to make sure everyone comes inside.
Yep.
And so we are working closely with our state agencies, each coordinated access network, and 211 to ensure people are going to warming centers and that they're getting the services that they need. And so they can go to that website and they can find out where every warming center is. And that is a way that we can all work together to save lives.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, Representative Felipe, thank you so much. Of course, we're going to continue talking about this throughout the session, as we're just at the start of this budget process now. But thank you both again for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
We still have more to get to here, though, on The Real Story. We're walking through the presidential transition, President Biden's farewell speech, which had several call-outs to Connecticut, and President-elect Trump's potential cabinet as he starts his second term. Stay with us.